How is little Eric?
He's fine, he's back tomorrow.
I know he is.
So I'm bringing him down basically to say in a few years' time you hopefully are going to be doing what Daddy does. It's going to get him used.
The world knew Simon Cowell as the sharp-tongued judge who built his empire on music and television, until life delivered a blow that stripped away that hardened image. The man who once lived for fame and fortune found himself at a crossroads, where family mattered more than spotlights. After his young son faced a heartbreaking diagnosis, what followed was an emotional goodbye, revealing a side of him rarely seen before. Join us as we explore the story of a father confronted with the fragility of life and the weight of love. Chapter 2. The Beginning. From pain to joy, Simon Cowell had built his name in the entertainment world. He appeared on television almost every week, judging talent shows that millions of people watched. His sharp remarks and strong opinions turned him into one of the most familiar faces in the industry. His life revolved around music and television. Work took the lead in everything he did. Long hours, constant travel, and big business deals filled his days and nights. Everything began to shift in 2013. That year, Simon started seeing Lauren Silverman. At that time, she was married to Andrew Silverman, who happened to be Simon's friend. When Andrew filed for divorce, he accused Lauren of adultery and named Simon in the legal papers. The story quickly reached the press, and soon it was being discussed everywhere. Then another detail came out. Lauren was expecting a baby with Simon. The divorce became a major topic in the media, but it never went to court. By August, the Silvermans had settled everything in private. This allowed Simon to avoid public court appearances and stay out of direct involvement in the legal process. Not long after, Simon confirmed that he was going to be a father. On February 14, 2014, their son was born. That moment changed Simon's world in a way he had never expected. It was not just the arrival of a baby. It was the event that made him stop and think about his life in a different way. For most of his life, Simon had not planned on becoming a father. He felt too set in his ways. Work always came first, and he enjoyed the freedom of living without the responsibilities of raising a child. But the moment he saw the first scan of his unborn son, something inside him shifted. A new part of him seemed to wake up. The man who once avoided family life now found himself thinking about it every day. They named their son Eric Philip Cowell in honor of Simon's late father. This choice carried deep meaning for him. It brought back memories of the man who had shaped his early life and created a connection between past and future. After losing both parents, he never thought he would feel love that strong again. Yet, Eric's arrival brought it back. Each day became filled with small moments that mattered more than anything he had achieved in his career. As Eric grew, Simon began changing his routine. He turned down major offers that would keep him away from home for too long. He started planning his schedule around his new life as a father. He still worked, but he found time for bedtime stories, school events, and moments of play. He no longer stood aside. He stepped in whenever Eric needed him. His focus moved from television ratings to the small details of his child's life. As Eric grew older, Simon started noticing small details about his behavior. He paid attention to the way Eric reacted in different situations. It was not worry that drove him, but a sense that something about his son's way of experiencing the world was different. When Eric neared his second birthday, Simon realized he had not yet started speaking. Other children of the same age were forming words and simple sentences, but Eric stayed mostly without speech. At first, Simon told himself that maybe his son was just developing at his own pace. Yet the thought kept returning, no matter how much he tried to set aside. People close to Simon reassured him that every child grows in their own way. They said some children take longer to talk or adjust to the world. Even so, Simon could not ignore his own instincts. His career had been built on noticing small things others overlooked, and with Eric, he felt something he could not easily explain. At night, sleep often escaped him. He would lie awake, going over the details in his head. He thought about Eric's future and wondered if he was doing enough. He began reading books and searching online about child development. The more he learned, the more questions he had. There were no clear answers, only the sense that Eric's journey would not be the same as most children's. But he was ready to walk it with his son, no matter where it led. Getting answers, the whole experience began during a family holiday, when Eric was only 4 years old. Simon had planned what he believed would be the perfect getaway. Yet the moment they arrived, the trip began to take a different shape. What Simon thought would bring joy seemed instead to bring strain. Eric struggled through each part of the experience. At first, Simon told himself it was just the usual trouble of a child adjusting to a new place. But before long, it became too hard to ignore. The resort was filled with noise, movement, and bright distractions. Music played, people talked loudly, and children ran around. For Eric, it was too much to take in. New surroundings didn't sit well with him. The food felt strange, unfamiliar. His sleep was disrupted by a schedule that kept changing. Every small shift in the day's routine seemed to unsettle him. Sights, sounds, and smells that others barely noticed became overwhelming for him. One evening, everything came to a head. The open terrace was packed with families eating, laughing, and talking over music. Eric sat at the table, his body tense. He covered his ears tightly with his hands and began to rock back and forth in his chair. The sound of dishes clinking and voices rising only made him retreat further into himself. Simon tried to reach out to offer comfort, but it was as though Eric had shut himself away completely. Later that night, Simon called Lauren. They both knew they had reached a point where they couldn't put things off any longer. This wasn't about fear. It was about getting answers. They needed guidance from people who could help them understand how Eric experienced the world. The months that followed were filled with visits to specialists. Eric was observed in different settings. Simon and Lauren answered everything they could, giving a clear picture of Eric's habits and reactions. Then came December 2018. Simon walked into a small office to hear the results. Even though he had been preparing himself, the moment still carried weight. The diagnosis was given: autism spectrum disorder. Simon wasn't shocked, but hearing the words turned an idea into reality. It was no longer a vague thought in his mind. Now it was something concrete. Understanding began to take shape. Eric's brain worked in its own unique way. The way he processed information and reacted to the world was different from most children. There would be challenges, and they would require careful thought. The doctor explained the signs. Eric had difficulty with speech. He reacted strongly to certain sounds. He needed predictable routines to feel safe. Everything described matched the way Eric had always behaved. The report didn't just point to difficulties. It also showed areas of strength. Eric had a gift for spotting patterns and noticing details others easily missed. His ability to focus deeply on one subject for a long period was remarkable. The experts described his condition as moderate. This meant that while he would need extra support in some areas, his strengths could grow with the right approach. The aim wasn't to change him. It was to shape the environment so that he could thrive within it. That evening, Simon found Eric sitting on the floor, carefully lining up toy cars. Each one had to be placed in a precise position, and Eric's concentration never wavered. Watching him work, Simon saw beauty in the way his son's mind functioned. Eric wasn't missing anything. He wasn't broken. He was simply different, and that difference was something valuable. With answers finally in hand, the path forward became clearer. Eric needed speech therapy to help with communication. Occupational therapy would support his motor skills. Behavioral guidance would help him manage daily challenges. Simon would have to take on a new role, one that required constant learning. He needed to study new methods, ask questions, and stay informed. Old routines had to be set aside. New ones had to be built around what worked for Eric. The life Simon once knew began to change in every way. Each decision, whether big or small, now started with one thought: how it would affect Eric. Every plan, every adjustment, every step forward was shaped to fit the world his son lived in. And in that process, Simon found himself stepping into a different kind of life, one that carried more meaning than he had ever imagined. And so the journey began. Chapter 4. Growing with Autism. Growing with autism after the diagnosis. Simon Cowell's world shifted in a way he had never imagined. The unpredictability that had once kept him moving were replaced with something far more structured. His days began and ended with one focus. Everything he did had to fit around his son's needs. The easy freedom of his old life disappeared, and in its place came careful planning. Eric needed stability. He needed the same patterns, the same flow, the same way of doing things each day. Back in Malibu, Simon didn't wait before making changes. He brought in experts who could help shape the house into a safe place for Eric. Every part of the home was studied and adjusted. Lights were softened so they wouldn't overwhelm. Sounds were reduced so they wouldn't distract or upset. Even the feel of surfaces was considered. Chairs, sofas, rugs, and walls were chosen for comfort. Each room gained a purpose. Nothing was left to chance. Simon's own routine started to form around Eric's daily needs. Mornings began with small, familiar tasks before heading into therapy sessions. Some days focused on speech therapy, where Eric worked to shape words and sounds. Other days were spent in occupational therapy, where he learned to manage sensations like touch, sound, and movement. Social activities needed careful preparation. Playdates, which to outsiders might have looked effortless, required hours of planning. Simon would picture every step in his mind, going through possible moments that could overwhelm Eric, and adjusting them to make things easier. Their bond deepened in this constant effort. It grew not through long talks, but through shared moments and the patience to meet each day with understanding. Yet, in the middle of all this, Simon faced feelings he had not expected. He did not feel sadness over who Eric was. What weighed on him were the pictures he had once carried in his mind, the road trips, the casual back-and-forth conversations, the shared jokes between a father and son. Those moments did not arrive in the way he had once imagined. Instead, Simon learned to see meaning in small signs. Eric spoke through his eyes, his movements, and the way he reached out. Over time, Simon began to read these signs with care, understanding what they meant and how to respond. Therapy days often tested both of them. Simon would sit through sessions, watching Eric try hard to learn and adapt. Each step forward felt like a victory. A single new word could light up the room. A hug that lasted a little longer than before could mean progress. Even steady eye contact was a sign that things were moving forward. These moments were worth more than anything else. Slowly, Simon began to turn down work. He passed projects to people he trusted. Big commitments in faraway places no longer fit into the life he was shaping. Everything was now about being present. But as the months went by, another challenge crept in: loneliness. It was not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that grows when you carry something too heavy to share. Even those close to him could not fully understand the pressure. Every choice he made felt like it carried weight. At night, when the house settled and the outside world faded away, Simon often found himself sitting in Eric's room, watching him sleep. Those hours were when the responsibility felt sharpest. The room felt still, but in his mind, thoughts kept moving. People asked him about his life, but he kept his answers short. He didn't want to explain in detail. Doing so would draw attention to Eric, and that was something he refused to do. His feelings were not rooted in sorrow over difference. They came from knowing how the world could be. He understood that not everyone would take the time to see what made Eric special. Some might overlook him. Others might judge without knowing. That thought stayed with him and shaped everything he did. Simon knew his role was to keep building a life where Eric could grow strong, confident, and protected, even if the rest of the world failed to understand his worth. But they had no idea what waited beyond their front door. Chapter 5. Clearing the Air. Clearing the air. Simon Cowell had always been known to the world as the sharp judge who never held back, the man who could cut through a performance with a few strong words. That image stayed in the public eye for years, but behind the scenes, something very different had started to shape his life. Very few people outside his close circle understood what was truly happening with Eric, because Simon kept much of it away from public view. Eric had appeared in public a few times, but one moment on Britain's Got Talent stood out. He had reached over and pressed the golden buzzer, setting off a wave of cheers in the room and smiles from people watching at home. Many saw it as a sweet and spontaneous act between father and son. But that day had been carefully shaped to work for Eric. Every part of it was planned so that he would feel safe and comfortable.